One of the most talked about topics on the internet when it comes to motorcycles is oil. What kind of oil? How often should you change it? What viscosity? Oil and tires are the two most common subjects. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years, and no two people seem to agree on this.
Welcome to another episode of Garage Talk, the podcast for motorcycle enthusiasts with your host, Cruiseman. Today's episode is sponsored by Cruiseman's Garage Honda Goldwing Maintenance Videos, a collection of more than 80 videos that show you how to maintain your own Honda Goldwing. Today's episode starts now.
Okay, well, for as long as I can remember, every forum I go to, every YouTube channel, anything to do with motorcycles, even sitting around coffee with a couple of guys, the subject seems to always turn to oil. You know, everybody's an expert. Everybody knows exactly what the perfect situation is. Well, and I've been guilty of it too. I try to give my 2 cents worth from what I know over 20 years, which isn't much. So I thought, well, let's put all this to rest. So today we've got one of the world's foremost, I'm reading this off his website, by the way, one of the world's foremost tribologists, the study of friction wear and lubrication. I didn't even know that existed. Lake Speed holds multiple certifications from the Society of Tribologists and Lubrication Engineers. I didn't know that society existed either. Lake also formulated lubricants used by Joe Gibbs Racing and other professional teams to win the Daytona 500 and numerous NASCAR championships. Lake, welcome to Garage Talk.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate having me on. That sounds really impressive when you read it that way. You know, the funny thing is, I was really like everybody else, 20 years ago, before this journey of tribology started in my life. Growing up in NASCAR, my dad being a NASCAR driver and working in the race shops and, having oil company sponsors and things like that, I considered myself really knowledgeable about oil until I met the people from Lubrizol. We'll get to them later.
Okay.
And the fact that probably no one listening has ever heard of Lubrizol is probably a good thing, right? That should help provide some frame of reference for how little we really know, that when I met the people that actually make the molecules that go into the oil, then I realized I didn't know anything.
Right. I have a feeling that's how I'm going to come out of this today. I didn't know anything.
It's like you said, man, you get any kind of car guys, gals, motorcycle guys, gals, boat guys, gals, airplane folks. The topic of oil and additives is going to come up sooner or later, and there will be very strong, passionate opinions about said topic. Unfortunately, 99% of that is formed based on speculation, not on actual science. That's where the disconnect comes in. And that's where we're here to help, right? It's that I was fortunate enough to, like you said, work in the industry, be connected with the people that actually make the molecules. We can talk about what really happens, not discounting anyone's experience, but sometimes you theorize, oh, this is why X happened. And then once you've had that theory and that X happened, then you believe that, well, Y caused X to happen. In the reality, it may have been G that caused X to happen, and your theory was wrong.
Right. I've got to ask, is the last name just luck? I mean, is that?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
What are the odds?
My grandfather named my dad after his two best friends, business partners, last names. So I'm Lake Chambers Speed Jr. My dad's Lake Chambers Speed. That was Dad named him after Paul Lake and Don Lake and Paul Chambers. Those are the two guys. Cool. Speed is our family name all the way back to England. Wow. I've actually been to a church in London where one of our ancestors is buried. And yeah, so
Wow.
Speed's real name.
So that's a pretty fortuitous given your industry. And
Well, the other thing too is people know my dad for the NASCAR.
right,
My
right.
uncle, my dad's older brother, the guy that drove him to all the go-kart races when he was coming up, owned North Jackson Honda Yamaha. He was the motorcycle distributor dealer for the Jackson, Mississippi area when I was growing up. And my first ATV was a Honda 70. So motorcycles, while my dad was a NASCAR guy, motorcycles were 100% in the family.
Oh, cool. That's very cool. And just real quick, why the very first video of yours I saw was the one where you were doing the oil change on your daughter's new Toyota.
Mm-hmm.
I think it had a few hundred miles on it. And I really could relate with a lot of what you were saying, because I have always told people, you should change your oil. If you get a new vehicle, always change it within you say 500 to 1,000 miles, for the very reasons that you explained in that video. So it made me feel good to know that I wasn't giving that bad information. Why should motorcyclists test their oil? I know car guys do. You have a company. Tell me a little bit about SpeedDiagnostix and what you guys do and why people use your service.
Well, essentially, oil analysis is something that more people are actually rely on than they even realize. And what I mean by that is power generation. So like nuclear power plants, any kind of coal or hydroelectric power plants use used oil analysis to determine when to do maintenance. Aircrafts, so the entire aviation industry, if you've flown on an airplane, used oil analysis is what they use to determine when to do maintenance. Okay. There's a study from the U.S. Navy that went into, okay, what's the best way to do maintenance? And the motivation is obviously the U.S. Navy has what we'll call very high reliability needs, right? When you're talking about nuclear submarines, nuclear aircraft carriers, the jets that are on there, all the things they have, they need a very high level of reliability. So they studied what type of maintenance. Should it be time maintenance based? What should it be that we use to do maintenance? And they found that the most effective way to have the best reliability was to do predictive maintenance. When if it's a lubricated system, that's via used oil analysis. The trend data, no different than as we get older, we have to go to the doctor a little more often. Right? They like to see us every year, and they want to do the blood test and just to check your levels. Right? Where's your LDL and where's your everything else? Right? This is the same thing, because the Navy figured out was that if they did time-based maintenance, if they said, you know what? Yeah, that oil might be able to live, 5,000 hours in that turbine. Yeah, but to be safe, we're just going to change it every 3,000 hours regardless. They experienced more failures than if they just left it alone. I'm going to let that sit in for a second, because that's going to kind of cause a lot of people to bristle back. Because there's a lot of people's thought process is, well, I'm just going to change it every couple thousand miles, so I'm going to be safe. Well, that U.S. Navy study would say, no, you're not being safe. You're actually going to have more opportunities for maintenance-induced failures. Every time you do something, there's a chance for contamination, or for that part that you're replacing could possibly be defective or contaminated, or you tighten something wrong, or you over tighten it or under tighten it. The Timken, when I was at Gibbs, Timken was one of a bearing company, was one of our technical sponsors. 90% of all bearing failures are related to contamination or misinstallation.
Okay.
So
interesting.
When you look at reliability as a whole, it's really about, if you want the best reliability, it's about deploying science. In this case, we're going to do used oil analysis. It means we can take a sample of that used oil. We can run several different tests on it. We can test things like viscosity. What's the thickness of the oil? Because if it's supposed to be a 10W40, well, then there's a range of what that should flow like in the lab.
Right.
And if it's too low, then that's a problem. If it's too high, well, what's going on? Why is it not what it's supposed to be? Is it contaminated? Is there water in it? Is there glycol in it? Is there sand? What's going on? Are there coolant additives in there? Right? We can detect head gasket leaks before you really have any other sign.
Right.
Right. And then we can also check wear metals. We can look at the additive package. We can tell what's going on. Like, did someone put the wrong oil in the engine? Like, were they supposed to put in brand A, this type of oil, like say car oil, but they actually put in brand X and it was a diesel oil? Well, how do you know that? Well, we can tell these things.
Sure.
So really, like I said, going back, the best analogy is the doctor. Is what we do at SpeedDiagnostix is we work with a lab, just like your doctor isn't the one that does the testing himself. Right? He's not taking the blood. He's not running the test himself. What he's doing is he's telling, the nurse, hey, take this sample, have the lab run these tests. That's what I do. I'm the doctor in this scenario.
Right.
We have a lab that has all the right equipment. They're going to run the test that I've prescribed, and then they're going to give me that data. I'm going to look at that data, and then I'm going to tell you if you're okay or not.
Okay.
And we're going to give you back a report that's color-coded, yellow, red, and green.
Right.
So that if it's green, everything's good. You got nothing to worry about. If there's something that's yellow or red, then we need to have a conversation. Right? There's some points here we need to cover, right? And we try to address it, and we do everything in plain English. We don't, for example, iron is written out as iron. It's not the chemical symbol Fe. So there are some labs out there that they do a great job testing, but their report is kind of Greek to most people, unless you happen to know that potassium is K, not P, right? You got to know these things, right? So we make it easy for the everyday average person to be able to access the same technology that allows airplanes to fly and nuclear power plants to operate, and for the U.S. Navy to do their job, which we're very thankful for. We just put that same power in your hands and make it pretty easy to do. Yeah.
Well, most of our viewers are they're watching because they're a motorcycle enthusiast. And I'd say probably 75% of them own a Honda Goldwing, which is a kind of a high-end touring bike. And some of them own Harleys or Indians, but I'd say most of them own high-end touring bikes. They may own multiple motorcycles, but people who buy a Honda Goldwing usually buy it to last many, many years because it's an expensive motorcycle. And there are stories of people that, in fact, I met somebody just a few weeks ago that had put 700,000 miles on his, I can't remember if it's a 2014 or what it was, Honda Goldwing. And which I blew my mind, but it's not uncommon to meet people that have hundreds of thousands of miles on these engines. And so I think this information is really valuable for somebody with an expensive motorcycle that wants to take good care of it and they want to make it last. So that was the reason that I felt like this is a super important topic. And I think a lot of just the reports that I got back from your lab, I wasn't that shocked when I looked at Dale's report. Dale's a friend of mine, has a brand new Honda Goldwing. We pulled the oil out, I think 530 miles, something like that. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming it was the Honda non-synthetic GN4 10W30 because that's what Honda recommends. But I don't know that for a fact. But you might be able to tell from your...
Looks like it.
Okay, probably is. Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess let's just get right into
1030.
Okay. Well, let's get right into that analysis on Dale's bike because everything looked good until we get down to you had a little red mark on wear at 1,000 miles. Tell me about that.
Well, so that's being driven by copper. So what we do is look at every different thing in the oil. So by the wear metals, what we can do is we can take that sample of oil, and because every element, on the periodic table, when you burn it, it has its own unique wavelength of light. Okay. So when we can analyze the oil, we burn the oil, and we look at the light spectrum that's emitted. And based on what wavelengths and the intensity of those wavelengths, we can know what's actually in the oil. So it's pretty common for a new engine like this that the copper levels are high, because copper is a yellow metal, it's softer. So during break-in, it's pretty common for those to be higher, especially there's just debris. Like break-in is the highest amount of normal wear you're ever going to see in an engine, which is why I think it's so important, if you can, take a sample of the new oil or at break-in, because that's going to give you the high watermark for your engine. Because you know that if those numbers ever get back near those break-in numbers again, there's a problem.
Yeah.
You'll be able to catch it before the thing starts making noise and doing other weird stuff, right? That's the whole idea, is like normal break-in is going to give you the high watermark for comparison in the future. Hopefully you never need it, but you've got it in case you do. Then when you total up all the wear metals, because what can happen is you could have a situation where there's some kind of contaminant, maybe at a low level in the engine, and it's just causing broad spread wear. Right. Well, with a low number of miles, no individual metal may be so high to cause hit a warning, but collectively they all do. Right. So that's what those last two lines on the report are all about, is the total wear metals, then the wear rate per 1,000 miles. Like how much is in there, and at what rate is this coming in? Now, typically the wear rate per 1,000 miles isn't a great metric to look at below 1,000 miles, because the math is inflating the number, just making it bigger. Right. So, but it can still be a guide point, because what you want to see as the engine breaks in, that number should go down dramatically with each subsequent sample, especially as you begin to extend out the drain interval. There should be this really nice glide slope on that. So you can still use it as a valuable thing, because you want to see that slope. If you're not seeing that slope, if it's staying up, there's a problem. So it's just a way of getting taking as much of the information we can, creating a data structure that lets us evaluate what's going on. And we know what normal looks like. Copper being up doesn't bother me. That's normal for break-in. High wear rate, high wear metals, again, normal for break-in. The next sample, let's say 1,500 miles, those should all come down. If they all come down, you're going to get a good big green thumbs up, good on the condition of the report. Even if the numbers aren't super low, but as long as it's heading in the right direction, the trend's heading in the right direction, then we know that things are going good, then we can give it that, because the trend is more powerful than any one individual test or any one individual result.
At what age of an engine will that trend begin to go back the other way? I guess it varies depending on the engine, but I mean, at some point,
really varies, Chris. You can, again, depending upon how the engine's manufactured and what the operating conditions of the engine are and maintenance, it's pretty crazy. It'll get really, really low, and typically it'll get to its lowest before it starts to turn.
Okay.
A lot of production stuff is, for lack of a better term, is made a little bit rough, because your surfaces need to have some roughness to hold oil. If it's too smooth, it won't hold oil. When that surface can't hold oil, that's where the lubrication goes away. So what typically will happen is you're going to get lower wear as some of that roughness goes away, which is increasing load capacity.
Right.
It's a good thing. But at some point, you're going to hit that turning point where now I don't have enough oil retention. So now my wear is going to start to go up. So the OEMs would rather typically start with a rougher surface to begin with. So it potentially has longer life. But then there's some OEMs that go a step further. They're a little bit smarter, and Honda's one of them. Honda does a great job. They're one of the best, if not the best, engine building company on the planet. They engineer the surfaces. So they've got a rough, they have valley underneath, but the top of the surface is smooth. It's not just a single roughness with all these peaks. And they're just like, okay, well, those peaks are going to wear down, and the filter is going to capture some of the stuff. And maybe we'll tell them to change the oil a little bit sooner initially. Right. And we're just going to, it's going to be fine. We'll deal with the exceptions. Company like Honda, Cummins in the diesel world, for example, they do a really good job of engineering the surface texture so that it has these good valleys to hold the oil, but then it has these nice flat plateaus on top to hold the load so that you have less wear initially. And then that surface actually has more durability. And that's where, I mean, again, Honda, 700,000 mile engine, not surprised.
So why do manufacturers, I know Honda says now, and they've changed it over the last few years, they say do the first oil change at 4,000 miles. My new Lexus, it said 10,000 miles. I mean, to me, that just seems extreme to me. I mean, I've always blamed it on they have this environmental position. They're trying to use less oil,
you're not blaming it wrong. So you got to remember the OEMs don't just get to build cars and trucks and motorcycles and boats in a vacuum. They don't just get to build whatever they think is the very best from the engineering perspective and then just put it in the market. There's this thing, at least in the U.S., called the Environmental Protection Agency, and it has counterparts around the world, right? So in Japan, there's their version, there's a European version of the EPA, and so the governments basically say, we want certain things, emissions, things from the engine, right? So you're saying, well, how do emissions correlate to oil change intervals? Well, in the EPA CAFE, so that's the Corporate Average Fuel Economy Standard, in the appendixes, it's not in the calculation, it's in the appendices, there is room that allows OEMs to get credit toward their fuel economy by reducing carbon footprint and things like that. So oil change intervals have gotten longer because that was a way for them to get credit towards their fuel economy, towards their total emissions were lowered by extending oil drain intervals, because all of those regulatory agencies view used motor oil as a environmental hazard, right? It's something that is waste that goes into the environment, that's damaging the environment. So if we can reduce that by longer drain intervals, then they get credit for that. So you were not wrong. You were 100% right in your
and you and I would probably argue that an engine that lasts 700,000 miles is probably less harmful to the environment than one that only lasts 150,000. So, but you know, that's another topic for another day. Yeah. But good.
Well, again, it's no different than teaching to the test, right? So if the students don't know what questions are going to be on the exam, they have to prepare for a wide range of topics. If they've already been given what the test is, then what they're going to do? They're going to study just for the answers on the test. Right. And that's essentially what happens is they come in and say, we want you to do this. And here's the incentive. If you do these things, well, it's basic economics. You know, you can have all the intentions you want. What moves the needle is incentives.
Yeah. And I've always said, you know, I know these companies have an environmental agenda, but I don't. My agenda is to keep my motorcycle lasting as long as I can and performing as well as it can. if you don't mind, I sent you a sample of my oil out of my Goldwing. We'll take a look at that. It only had about, what was it? I don't think I put it on here. I think it was about
410 miles is what I have on.
Well, it's 410 miles on the oil change, but the bike has about 4,700 miles. So,
okay.
But on this particular oil change only had 410 miles.
And that one had a really high level of silicon.
Yeah. What would be the reason for that?
Interesting.
And that's, I think that was my third oil change.
Interesting. Okay. So for being the third oil change, that is very high because it's not uncommon with a brand new engine to have a high level of silicon because the RTV sealants that are used to assemble the engine are silicone based, right? And silicone contains silicon. So it shows up in that. So it's pretty common on that. And again, it's not the same person building every engine. So the amount of silicon that ends up varies quite a bit because of that. Now, you're in Texas.
Yeah.
Where's Dale?
He's in Texas. He's the same city I live in.
He's in Texas too. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. So sometimes it can be just dust, right? I'm not sure if there's anything you've done differently in terms of air filters or something like that.
Yeah, I have not changed my air filter. Honda recommends, I think, at 20,000 miles. I usually do mine at 10 or 12. But,
that's not it then.
47.
If it's a factory filter.
Yeah, and I haven't ridden through, any dusty situations. When I lived in West Texas, it was always dusty. But,
yeah. Exactly. That was the first thing that hit my mind was Texas. Oh, yeah, he's out there riding around. And yeah, that could be what it is. That one is very interesting because that's a much higher level of silicon than we normally see, even for braking. We normally see in a brand new engine, low 100s, typical for a new engine. Now, let me ask you this. The oil filter, I think I remember watching one of your videos, you used the Honda factory filter.
That's correct.
Does that filter come with the gasket pre-lubed?
No, I always lubricate it.
With what?
Oh, I say it doesn't. I don't think it does. I just take a little bit of the oil the fresh oil that I'm about to put in and run my finger around it. Yeah.
Because what I'm saying with that is so the Toyota one, for example, when people ask me, why didn't I use the Toyota filter for my daughter's car when I did that? Well, one, I couldn't even find the filter. The car was so new to the U.S. That I couldn't even find the filter, to get it. But when we finally did get the factory filter, Toyota pre-lubes that O-ring.
Okay.
With a silicone grease.
Oh, huh. Yeah, so I'm not sure if Honda does or not. I'm not really sure.
Okay.
I don't think they do because it looks pretty dry when I take it out of the package.
I mean, if it looked dry, you're touching it, it's dry, then it's not pre-lubed. Because this literally almost like this white, almost looks like lithium grease stuff that's on there. It's kind of that translucent, like silicone looks like, grease that's on the factory Toyota filter. So, that one's a bit of a mystery.
I think I'll probably flush it out, put some fresh oil in, run another 500 miles and send another sample in and see if that starts coming down. Because I wonder what it was at 500 miles. I obviously didn't do a test at 500 miles. It'd been interesting to see if that's going up or down.
Right, exactly, yeah. I mean, because usually if it's going to be something,
because Dale's is really low with 16.
Everything else is pretty good. Yeah, I mean, again, the copper being where it is isn't surprising for what this kind of thing is, right?
Right.
Even at that mileage, we see that sometimes it can take up to 10,000 miles in some cases for some engines for those levels to finally kind of calm down. And you're at 20, so you're right at the cutoff point.
Right.
So 20 is the flagging point. So if it had been at 19, 1 part per million less, that'd have been green. So you're right there at it. That's one day when we get better, we'll have a more graphical representation of the numbers so you can kind of see where you are, like maybe like a bar chart type deal. You can see how close to the range you are. Like, am I way over? Am I really close? Am I just borderline? So, yeah, the biggest thing there is if there is any silicon in the oil coming from, like, say, sand or dust, or maybe some kind of casting debris from the engine that's just kind of coming on, that would cause the copper to be higher, because copper is going to wear faster than the other parts of the engine would.
It would be pretty unusual to have oil contaminated out of a brand new bottle, though, wouldn't it?
It would.
Okay.
It would.
Well, I did send you a couple of samples for a selfish reason. I sent you one of the Honda HP4S silicone, which I don't have in my bike at this time, but I did have a bottle to take a sample from. And I also sent you, because a lot of people ask about synthetic oils, so we're going to talk about that too, if you will. And then I also sent you a sample of the Castrol GTX, brand new out of the bottle.
Yeah.
Both of these are brand new out of the bottle. So I have been guilty in the past for cost savings to use the Castrol GTX because it does meet Honda's stated specifications. But walk us through, I know one's a 1040 because Castrol only makes a 1040 in a non-energy conserving oil. They don't make a 1030.
Right. Yeah.
Walk me through the differences of these two oils, two synthetics. How would you analyze these two products and how would they compare to each other?
So the first thing is there's three primary differences or types or categories, however you want to call it, when it comes to motorcycle engines. You've got air-cooled engines, got water-cooled engines. Then we also have, we'll call it the subcategory of wet clutch engines, where the clutch oil is shared with the crankcase oil. So it's the same oil. That's obviously dirt bikes are the most common version of that. They're not saying there aren't any, but there aren't a lot of air-cooled wet clutch engines. So you can kind of put the air-cooled engines on their own thing.
Right.
Then you got the water-cooled engines, and you kind of split them between the separate clutch and the wet clutch. And even though I know that the separate clutch, most of those are wet, but they have their own dedicated fluid. So, and the reason why I bring this up right off the bat is that application always dictates chemistry. Well, we just laid out three very distinct applications in terms of its mechanical requirements. And what I mean by that is, in an air-cooled engine, the oil is the primary coolant for all the internal stuff. Yes, there's air fins moving around, but it's the oil that's cooling the piston. It's the oil splashing on the bottom of the piston that's taking out most of that heat. Now, a lot of that heat's going through the rings, so there's more thermal load on the oil in an air-cooled engine. So when you're designing or choosing an oil for an air-cooled engine, thermal stability, heat transfer, all of these things become really, really important. We won't even get into all the crazy myths around air-cooled stuff right now. I got videos on my channel about that. We can talk about that later, right? So, but understand that air-cooled engines have their own separate needs based on the thermal load of being air-cooled versus a water-cooled engine. Water-cooled engines can get away with a lot more things than an air-cooled engine can. But when we're talking about the water-cooled engines, and if you have the separate clutch, as a separate clutch oil, then that clutch oil is designed to have the correct coefficient of friction for the clutches. So the clutches engage properly at the right RPM and can hold the load. They don't slip, they don't shudder, they just work correctly because it's engineered for that application. Right. When you have that separate fluid just for the clutch, then the engine oil can begin to be a little more creative. It can have things like molybdenum and other friction modifiers, they call them reducers, that can lower the drag in the engine, which it leads to better fuel economy, maybe better acceleration, things like that. But in a wet clutch environment where the clutch shares those same friction modifiers, that's where they don't work.
Right.
That's where all kinds of bad things are going to happen. And unfortunately, there's a third variable that comes into play with the wet clutch water-cooled engine. That's the guy or gal holding the handlebars. Mm-hmm. Because no one uses the clutch in the same way. Right. And say a dirt bike is going to be different in how the clutch sees the load than, say, a Goldwing.
Right.
Goldwing's much, much heavier. And when you release that clutch, it's going to be very different, especially if you're in traffic. Right? You just can't dump the clutch and mat it. I mean, you can, but it won't end well for everybody, right?
Right.
Whereas the dirt bike guy, I can just dump the clutch and mat it, and it's just going to spin the back tire.
Right.
Right. And if, as long as I've got good control, I'm Bubba Stewart, I can probably drive the thing, or Jeremy Carmichael, right? Those guys could just do that stuff. So how the clutch is released plays a big role in how the oil responds. So what I mean by that, just to be really direct, there are some people that can get away with an oil that has a little bit of friction modifier in there, because essentially their application, their riding style is just dump the clutch. And it just hits, it locks, and it goes, because you're not slipping the clutch enough to allow those friction modifiers to start to do their work. Because everything has to happen on the surface. It's not about being bulk in the oil. It's what's happening molecularly on the surface. And the more you slip the clutch, the more opportunity. It's kind of like, tenderizing the meat, right? If you just have a steak and you just kind of drizzle some seasoning over it, that's different than if you go in there and really tenderize it and work it and massage the spices and the seasonings into the meat. It's going to be different in the end. It's no different than how you're using the clutch. So, I know that was a really long-winded answer and probably didn't even answer anything, just kind of set it up, is that I think people talk about motorcycle oils. And they ask, well, what's the best motorcycle oil? Well, I can't tell you, because you haven't told me what kind of motorcycle you have yet and what you're doing with it. Right. Because the application is going to dictate that kind of chemistry to find out what really works well for what you're riding and how you ride it. But understand, to your point about the resource conserving, that's a really great point that you brought up, that if you have a wet clutch bike, you want to avoid an oil that has the resource conserving inside the donut, because that's going to be a higher friction modified oil. And with a heavier bike where you're needing to slowly release the clutch out to be more smooth, that's going to bite you. Absolutely. And when you look at these two formulas, that's what stands out, is the different route they're going to try to provide that performance for the clutch. Where obviously Honda, they know they're building this oil specifically for a motorcycle. And they know that this is a port injected engine, not a direct injected engine. So there's a higher level of calcium, but that also brings up the level of zinc. So because the calcium detergent competes against the zinc, they fight each other. It's one reason why a lot of people think about, I'm just going to use a diesel oil. I'm going to go use Rotella T4 or something like that. Right. Because it doesn't have the resource conserving and it has more zinc, but it also has more detergent. So really, if you're looking at the Honda oil in a 1030, that additive package is pretty similar to what you're going to see historically in, say, Rotella, but in a 1540.
Okay.
And Honda knows that diesel oils typically don't have the greatest anti-foam package in them because they're not designed for high speed. So the higher the RPM of the engine, the more anti-foam control you need because the more aeration you get. So that's one place where diesel oils aren't ideal for motorcycle engines, is they typically don't have the best anti-foam and foam control performance, especially if the engine's going to be seeing, high sustained RPM.
Right.
That won't be ideal. There's less moly, less boron. Those are things that, moly is always a friction modifier, but they're trying to make it where the clutch doesn't bite hard. Like it's not that hard snap your head. So they're trying to modulate that clutch friction with the level of calcium, the zinc phosphorus, and the molybdenum in the Honda package.
Okay.
When you look at the Castrol GTX, because the GTX is a car oil, so its core chemistry has to be based on what the current API standard is. Well, the current API SP standard, which I'm sure is SP rated. So by doing that, that's why the calcium level is down so much. It's basically a third of what the GTX or the Honda is. But it adds in magnesium detergent, which is a really good type of detergent that also has a little more friction to it. So calcium tends to lower friction. Magnesium tends to raise friction. Now, this one has less zinc and phosphorus. The ZDDP also increases friction.
Okay.
It reduces wear, but increases friction. I know that's a tough one for people to get their mind around, but friction and wear are two different phenomenon. They're separate, and you can control them separately. So the lower level of zinc phosphorus lowers the friction here, but I've got less calcium, more magnesium. I can have a touch more molybdenum, a touch more boron in there. And so I would say I bet these oils actually have a fairly similar clutch feel once the engines are at operating temperature. Like once we got that, because viscosity wise, the GTX is a little bit thicker, but that probably it'll have a little bit of influence on how the clutch slips. It would probably slip a little bit more because of the viscosity, but especially at low temperature, it would probably slip more just because of the viscosity. Impacting how the clutch performs.
I know about 70% of the Goldwings being sold now, including mine and Dale's, are dual clutch transmissions. And I have used the GTX, not in this motorcycle, but in my previous, which was a dual clutch. And it seemed to perform fine. I didn't seem to notice any issues with the clutch. So that was good, but I just didn't want, I don't want to be recommending something to somebody and find out that, oh, there's something in here that's really going to do some major harm to your engine.
Right. No, I'd say you're better off using something like the GTX than, say, a diesel oil.
Right. I know a lot of guys use the oil you were talking about earlier. Art's got the name of it. I mean, a lot of people use it.
Yeah, Rotella. I mean, Rotella. It's everywhere, right? I mean, you can go to Walmart and buy it. It's cheap. In the diesel world, it's actually a really good diesel oil, and it's a good enough oil than almost anything else you put it in.
Right.
Car, truck, boat, motorcycle. It will function in a wide range of applications. And that's its hallmark, is that it probably won't kill you in pretty much anything you put it in.
Okay.
But there's a flip side. Just because it's not going to kill me, don't put it in a direct injection engine, then it will kill you, right? I got a whole video on that. I got a lot of hate mail about saying that, right? I heard the Rotella people's feelings when I said, hey, listen, if you put Rotella in a direct injection engine, it could cause it to blow up, because it can, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That high calcium level, in a direct injection engine can actually cause detonation in the engine. Wow. Something that's been proven. That's not my idea. It's not my theory. That's something that's been proven round and round. So other than a direct injection engine, Rotella is something you can put in a lot of different engines, that are port injected or carbureted, and it'll function and it'll get by. It'll be decent.
Right.
There's a difference between being decent and being valedictorian, right? It's like,
exactly.
C's get degrees, but there's only someone that's going to graduate, magna cum laude. And so to be at the very top of the class takes something different. So you got to decide a lot of times when it gets into the lubrication discussion, well, the first question is, what kind of student do you want to be? Are you a C's get degrees student? Mm-hmm. Or are you trying to be valedictorian?
Right.
Because those are two different paths.
Right.
Not saying that one's right and one's wrong by any means, but as you get serious about this discussion, you got to answer that question for yourself first.
Right.
Then based on that, I can give you different guidance to where you want to go.
Right. Do you by any chance know who makes Honda's oils?
I know who makes their car oil. So I don't know who makes their
I was assuming it was the same, but maybe not. Not that it matters.
It doesn't appear to be the same.
Okay.
It doesn't appear to be the same.
Okay.
No,
just based
it does
on
not.
what
That
you've
is
seen.
definitely, I've analyzed enough Honda oil. That is not Honda car oil.
Okay. Well, that's good to know, because I know some guys go to the Honda car dealers to buy oil to put in their Honda Goldwing. So that's good to know.
It is not the same.
Okay. Good to know. Okay, I'm going to let you.
Phillips down in Houston makes the car oil for Honda. You'll notice the bottle. The shape of the bottle is different.
Right.
If I had to guess, it's Idemitsu. I think Idemitsu might make Honda's motorcycle oils. If not, there's also a wide range of, we call them specialty blenders or toll blenders that make OEM oils.
Okay.
And so what will happen is the OEM will go to one of those additive companies. I mentioned earlier, Lubrizol. So there's all these different brands of oil on the planet, but there's only 4 companies that make the additives that go into every brand of oil and every brand of fuel on the planet.
Okay.
So
that's good to know.
There's a few thousand different companies that are, say, GM Dexos licensed around the world. 4 companies make the packages that go into every one of those brands.
Wow. What is your opinion of additives? What do you...
You should never put an additive in an engine oil.
Okay.
There's no need to ever put an additive in engine oil. If you have to put an additive in your engine oil to make the engine do what it needs to do, it means you're using the wrong oil.
I grew up back when everybody had an STP sticker on their their car window because that was so cool to have STP in your car. That was 100 years ago.
No. Listen, my dad was sponsored by Wins, the friction reducing the additive company in his NASCAR career. So I mean, I fully recognize the irony of my statement, but literally one of the questions on the exam that I had to pass to become a certified lubrication specialist, when is it appropriate to use an additive in an engine oil? And the answer was never.
Very good to know. Okay, I've got 3 things here that I've been telling people. And I know you've already blown up one of them. So I'm losing all my credibility here. I've always said fresh, clean oil will never harm an engine. But I think early on you said that's not necessarily true.
Well, the fresh, clean oil itself will not harm the engine. It's the installation of said oil.
Okay.
If you leave the drain plug loose, or, if some piece of debris, falls in the thing when you're not looking or whatever, those are the kind of things that the Navy was finding out that was happening, right?
Okay.
I'll say there probably is a bit of a difference, right? Let's be fair, between how the level of detail the enthusiast that owns said motorcycle is going to do versus the enlisted guy that had to do this job, right? So there probably is some difference in the spectrum, but it's still worth the takeaway of knowing that if you're gonna do the oil change this weekend, because in your head 6 months has gone by and I got to get the oil change, but I also got to go take the grandkids and go do this and go do that. Don't change the oil. Right. Wait until you have time to sit,
do it right,
do it quietly, do it right, then do it. Because fresh, clean oil is never going to hurt your engine.
Okay, good.
But you got to make sure that in the process of doing that, you're not doing something else that ends up inadvertently harming the engine. You
don't want to introduce any kind of contamination or issue.
No,
I get that.
No, over tightening a bolt or something like that. I mean, oil changes are pretty easy to do, but I've experienced it myself.
Sure.
Where I've, done work for somebody else in the family. They got to get, daughter or whatever, I gotta get the car done, and you crawl under the car, and whoever the last Yahoo at the place that did it over tightened it and stripped the threads. So now I've got this whole other problem, right?
Yeah.
So now this is the situation. So again, the fewer times you can touch it, the better off you are. The oil doesn't go bad with time. Just sitting in there. I mean, eventually when you start talking about years, that's different than months.
Right.
The old Jiffy Lube 3 months, 3,000 miles was to sell you oil. That wasn't about what's best for your engine.
Right. Now, assuming if I go on the assumption, and you can correct me on this, but if we went on the assumption that synthetic oil is somehow better than non-synthetic oil, I'm not saying that's true, but I'm saying assuming it is. I have always said I would rather do a more frequent oil change with non-synthetic oil, for example, 4,000 miles as opposed to 8,000 miles with synthetic oil. Assuming
I'm going to
that
go the opposite, right?
Okay.
I'm going to say you're better off using the synthetic oil, changing it less often. You're going to get better results.
Okay.
Because here's the other thing that pretty much no one knows. Oil filters get better as they age.
Really?
Yeah. Dust likes dust. So when you have debris in the filter, it actually filters better than it was brand new.
So it's trapping more because those molecules are filling up in there.
Yes. Yeah. Like in chemistry, we always say like, likes, like. So when you have something that's of the same material, the same chemical composition, wear debris, other things, when it gets trapped in there, when the other one like it comes by, it's more likely to capture it than if it's not there. A quote unquote dirty air filter typically filters better than a brand new clean air filter does for that very reason.
Well, so
that's one thing that, again, so if I'm saying I'll use the synthetic oil, I would change it less often and I'm going to get better results than more frequent changes with a lesser oil.
I think you just blew up my last one, which was I've always said it was important to change the filter with every oil change, but apparently not.
Well, so the trick is the filter is going to filter its very best right before it goes into bypass.
Right.
Once it goes into bypass, it's not filtering much of anything anymore.
Exactly.
So back to the oil analysis. If you're doing the oil analysis, then it gives you the data to get closer and closer to the quote unquote edge. You can become the valedictorian. You can get to a higher level, but you're not doing it blindly.
Right.
This is your guide that gives you data so you can see what's happening with my wear rate. Right. As I extend the drain interval, as I do this, what's happening? Could I go 4,000 miles on the oil, change it, not change the filter, put fresh oil in and run another 4,000 miles? Does that actually give me a lower particle count in the oil? Filter still working. Lower wear rate. If that does, awesome. But you were able to determine that for yourself. I'm not the Oracle of Delphi.
Yeah.
I can't tell everybody magically what's the best thing to do for them. But I can give you the framework. We can give you the tools that gives you the data that can get you there.
Exactly. Very good information. I'm learning more than I expected to learn. See, I thought you were going to agree with everything I said, but I'm glad you don't. I'm glad you don't, because I think what we've established is I don't know a damn thing about oil. Okay, tell me.
Well, the last time I was nice to somebody when I did a collaboration, I ended up having to put my foot in my mouth. So I learned from the last time, like, if you don't agree with what the other guy's saying, you should probably just say it and not be nice and just ignore that.
Fine. No, I'm glad. I'm glad to know the reality. What is your opinion of magnetic drain plugs?
Big fan of them.
Okay.
Big fan.
Good to know, because a lot of people ask me that.
The used oil analysis, like I said before, for it to work, you have to burn the oil. Well, if you think about it, going to, say, a Boy Scout camp out, bonfire. When you throw a big log on the fire, it doesn't burn right away.
Right.
You throw a little piece of kindling or a leaf in there, it'll be burned before it even gets to the base of the fire. So the oil analysis can only see particles smaller than 10 micron. You can't see stuff smaller than 30 or 40 micron. So you need to be able to see the bigger ones. So having particle count, or say having the magnetic drain plug, lets you see what's happening in terms of the larger particles that the used oil analysis can't see.
Okay.
So we have a thing, with us, we've got a standard kit, which is basically the standard analysis, which is that spectrometal analysis. We have a premium analysis that provides a particle count with a filter patch method, where we take all the oil and push it through a filter, and then a microscope goes in, and using a software, it counts all of the particles in the filter media of all the different sizes, and then gives you a cleanliness code. So it's like looking at your drain plug, but then saying, well, you have X number of this size, X number of that size.
Right.
So the drain plug is kind of just a quick visual reference, whereas the particle count is that detailed quantitative analysis. So qualitative, look at it. Quantitative, measure it. Better to have that than have nothing. Now, is it going to lower the wear in the engine or skew the results? I don't think so. It's really more about, hey, what's going on in the motor?
Honda oil filter for a Goldwing is about $16. SuperTech at Walmart's about $3.99. What's the difference? I always use the Honda, but
that's smart, because there's a giant difference in oil filters. And one of the things that I'm going to give you two things about oil filters, because we could be for another hour about filters.
Sure.
And I'm the motor oil geek. I'm not the oil filter geek, but I do know the oil filter geeks really well. So they're some buddies of mine. So the first thing is a percentage efficiency number on the box is meaningless without the micron to go along with it.
okay.
So if it says it's 98% or 99%, but at what micron?
Right.
Is it at 40 micron or 35, or is it 20? What's the number? Because obviously the higher the efficiency at a smaller micron is better filtration.
Sure. Okay.
So that's where there's usually a big difference between the budget filters and sometimes the more expensive filters. I mean, I don't get into all that. It's a metal end cap, or the slots are round, or they're oblong. That makes for good YouTube stuff, but it's not really anything that impacts the filtration and the performance of the filter. What it really boils down to is the micron rating of the media. What can it do? And back to what we said before, it's about the fact that filters get better as they get older. Now, here's the thing. If you go buy the extended performance filter, thinking that's a better filter, but you're defaulting to I'm going to change my oil every 3 months or 3,000 miles because that's safe, you're getting less efficiency from your filter. Because the only way it can be an extended life filter is for it to not be as efficient new.
Right. You're paying the price up front. Yeah.
You are. You're getting less filtration and you're throwing away before it ever even gets good.
And if I remember, I watched one of your videos. I think you're a fan of pre-filling the oil filter before you put it on. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, if it's upside down, that's really like you can't do that. And sideways is kind of tough. You can put a little bit of oil in there, but I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's does the roll go up or does the roll go down? I mean, it's not the end of the world,
right?
But I will say this: when you took the filter off, it was full of oil.
Right.
We've shown that when you crank the engine without it, there's a longer delay in oil pressure than if you don't fill it.
Right.
And when you get to really thin oils, it actually increases the amount of wear microscopically, but it's there.
Right.
If you don't care, you don't care. But if you do care, and you know that you can, it's incrementally better, whether that increment matters or not, why not do it?
Sure.
Yeah. Again, I'm from the world of NASCAR. There's not one setup change that you make on a car that takes it from a 15th place car to the pole winning car. It's about 16 or 17 different things that all add up together to get there. So that's my mentality, is that we're trying to build a thing that's going to go win the pole for the Daytona 500. And the only way I can do that is by doing every little thing the best I can do it. Not by being, well, it doesn't really make that big of a difference, so I'm just not going to do it. That's not the attitude. That's not the path that gets you to the pole position of the world's greatest stock car race. So everyone has to look at anything I make on the videos through that lens of you got to know who I am and where I'm from when I'm talking to you. I'm about being the best and doing it the very best you possibly can. If that's not what you want to do, that's fine. I'm not going to judge what you're trying to do.
Right.
But understand that the advice I give is based on that direction.
Well, I will say your YouTube channel has really opened my eyes. That's where I first found out about you. And tell everybody how they can find you on YouTube, and tell us a little bit about SpeedDiagnostix, and take a few minutes and just kind of tell us about your YouTube and what people can learn there.
So the channel is The Motor Oil Geek. And it just kind of came out of the fact that I've been doing different YouTube stuff for, say, Total Seal piston rings. There's a whole series on Stapleton 42 YouTube channel with my dad's old stock car, getting things out. So we're engine guys. I happen to be, the guy that did the engine oil stuff for Gibbs, but we got into doing YouTube stuff, doing engine things and car projects and stuff like that. But what I noticed was a lot of disinformation on the internet, on YouTube about oil. People talking about oil that don't know they're talking about oil, and they sometimes they get it wrong. And so it's okay. It's right. I realize, Chris, that most people they're not doing it with malicious intent, right?
Right.
It's just that they didn't know better. They were like me 20 years ago before I met the folks at Lubrizol. And we just did the best we could with what we knew. But then once I knew better, we did better, And so once we started seeing these things, I was like, I need to do my own channel, and I'm going to start addressing these things. And then it's just took off. And
That's great.
quite fortunately, we've had the oil and houses company for way longer than the YouTube channel's been around. And that was always there to support and provide the data and my analytical services to our engine builder customers and other people we've known through the industry. Right? It was kind of like not say a friends and family type business, but it was kind of a friends and family type business.
Right.
We had, Joe Gibbs Racing and, other NASCAR teams, and we had some Porsche folks and some other guys in other communities that we serviced that they just wanted that level of expertise for their track cars or whatever they were doing. So that business existed there doing that. The success of the YouTube channel for the Motor Oil Geek has actually made it where SpeedDiagnostix is now my full-time day job.
Okay, very cool. And SpeedDiagnostix, basically the way I utilized it, you order a sample, a kit, and it comes to you in a little bottle and a prepaid label, and you take a sample of your oil and send it off to the lab and send it back. And I think usually at least within a week, you get some sort of result back, and a very extensive report. I'll put this on the screen so people can see it. And it's
and that was what did you think about the process? Was it fairly easy to do?
Oh, very easy, very simple, very intuitive. I mean, I don't know how it could be any easier. I mean, it's really simple.
We try to make it really simple. Like I said, make it intuitive so that any car guy or gal that wants that data, it's pretty easy to get it, and you get it pretty quick.
Yeah. So
as long as the Postal Service does their job.
I'll tell you what, I really do appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today. I want to encourage everybody, if you haven't done so already, make sure you go to the Motor Oil Geek. That's your YouTube channel?
The Motor Oil Geek is the YouTube channel,
The Motor Oil Geek. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't done so already. Check out SpeedDiagnostix.com. And that's diagnostics with an X at the end. So I'll put it on the screen. Well, thanks again. I appreciate it. And I hope maybe we can do this again sometime once if I end up blowing my engine, I'll contact you and if you tell me why I did it. I don't think I will, but I never have yet. So, okay. Well, thanks, Lake, for being here. And again, appreciate it. And remember what I always tell everybody, ride often, but ride safe. Garage Talk is available on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, CastBox, and of course, YouTube. You can help support the podcast by making sure you've subscribed to my YouTube channel. Just click that little subscribe button down below. Don't forget to click the notification bell. And if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you hit that like button and give it a thumbs up. That really does help the channel.